Well, good morning, James. Thank you very much for coming along to the FIVA stand to talk with us this morning. Had an interesting chat with Karun Chanduk this morning. Describes himself as a pragmatist. Said he would rather see older cars out running with electronic ignition and things rather than not running at all. You're more of a purist, is that right?
Yes. Well, essentially not to go against Karun per se, but yes, the most important thing I think is that cars are running and seen and heard and smelt with the oils, everything else, all part of the experience and passing on that passion to the next generation. However, yes, the means of doing that, in fact, exactly, if someone cannot run a car at all without the electric ignition, particularly if there's no infrastructure, then of course that is a good thing. Although nowadays all of the parts are available worldwide, in fact, so it's not that somebody's running without and cannot access parts. In fact, even in the Far East, I've seen by chance in India, in fact even now there are parts that are available either, and if they're not made locally, they can be shipped for a very low cost for the ignition parts, for example. So there is a big movement to restore cars back to points, for example, and condensers, if people are doing the work. So, and I know some of the parts in the recent years have not been as reliable. Again, saying on the ignition point, all of the cars racing here have to run on their original points distributor setup, and unless they've anyhow, but in the whole, and on the main part they are very reliable as long as they're checked and serviced, and you have some relevant spares.
So you mentioned they're passing it on to the next generation, and of course it is an area that's under threat considerably. Young people these days much less interested in cars. Any brainwaves on how we engage the younger generation more with the older cars and the preservation industry?
Well, in fact, yes, but although they're not all my ideas, I mean, I'm lucky because I've grown up with many of these cars my life, because my father was involved in the cars. They were new at the time, and some were old already, and so I've grown up with them. But our children are involved, and I met my wife through the cars, and her family are with them. But there are a lot of initiatives, but including the fact that this is a family event here at Goodwood, but other events, and also the charities and Starter Motor Charity and their initiatives similar to that, and the apprenticeship schemes through the Heritage Skills Academy, an association of engineers, which give engineering and practical experience as well to people. So, and I think with the more people use the cars, take them, whether that's a local event at a show or just driving to the shops, or using the car for a journey, getting their children, or showing and spending the time to engage with the younger generations.
Yeah. But the generation that opened up the bonnet and took the engine apart and took a gearbox out and put it back in again, I mean that's gone now. I mean the current generation, it's all just computers and things. I mean, do you worry about those skills gradually ebbing away?
Yes, there is a very real threat of that. Although there's a core that is keeping going, and I think, and hopefully it will come not quite full cycle, but will return a lot, in that people are enjoying driving older cars again, even for the fun of driving with a manual gearbox, which is manufacturers are actually reintroducing manual gearboxes into new models because people have asked for that. So I think that I think that the momentum is gaining to keep a real experience, but also to keep the old cars going. And as long as there's a balance in the way that people do it, and do it in a way that is appropriate. And the other thing, sorry, if I could say that I think there should be a distinction, or there can be a distinction, between cars that are used regularly and cars that are either on display or references for historical sake. So it's really important that certain cars are preserved or conserved in their original specification state, even if a lot of others are used and don't necessarily comply to that if the owners are using it, because if there are, for example, some of their one-off cars or very historic cars, and it's great it's very important if they remain original. If then the cars that were made in many thousands are used and enjoyed around the world, and not, I think therefore, as for them, there's slightly less importance as long as there are references of that model that are correct.
Well, it's certainly encouraging that in your experience there's kind of a growth in interest. So where do you think we're going on fuel? We had a discussion again this morning as to whether the future is electric or the future is non-carbon fuel. What's your take on that at the moment?
Well, electric has been the talking point for a decade or more, and I was very early in driving for Tesla. In the UK, I did the marketing of the events here, Festival of Speed at the Goodwood Sprint, and set the first lap record. And that was really interesting and important. And the governments have focused on electric technologies, although hydrogen is actually a much older solution. The electrics go back over 110 years and so on. And even the first hybrids, the Armstrong from 1898, but with an electric starter, for example, even. So, but hydrogen as a fuel, not just with the fuel cell, is a very important technology that's being pushed through now very much from the UK, in fact. But then the synthetic or non-carbon fuels are a massive step forward, and there are the fully synthetic fuels coming through, but also the reclaimed fuels, especially the biofuels. And Le Mans 24 Hours this year was run, and the World Endurance Championship is currently run with reclaimed recycled fuel. So which is immediately 60% lower in emissions. So it shows that there's no change in performance and very little change to the internal combustion engine, which means it's great for heritage, because it means that people can continue to use the same cars with a different fuel, and it is very not just environment conscious, but it is genuinely helping the environment. It will not be a politically popular move, of course, because the revenues in developing the technologies and building new cars doesn't apply to putting new fuel in old cars. But that's not I don't want to get into that.
And on a similar note, am I right in thinking that now King Charles II has an Aston Martin into which he put an electric motor? Is that correct?
Yes. I don't know very much about the spec of that, but yes, exactly, it is correct.
And from what you're saying, you expect to see a bit more of that going on in the near future, those kinds of conversions?
Well, there are a number of the conversions already. A number of manufacturers are doing that across a range of cars. Although, really, the better thing for a much neater and truer solution would be to use new fuels non-carbon fuels in the old cars. Literally, there's just effectively a couple of pipes change, and the fuel lines, for example, and maybe the jets in the carburetors, but otherwise they run exactly as they were with the engine as they were built, but they're just not emitting carbon particles.
Yeah, certainly sounds like the best solution, the best compromise between preservation and the younger generation that are more interested in these sort of green and environmental issues.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you very much, James. It's good to have you on the stand. Thank you very much.
Not at all.
Thank you.